Well, it's just worth remembering that Chris Hedges is a member of the same polity, the same country as Donald Trump. The contrast is stark, and it's a useful point for me to make a point that I often do. We have no hatred for the people of the United States of America. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the few active in anti-imperialist politics in Britain with American blood in my veins. We just don't want to be Americans. We don't want to be ruled by Americans, and we refuse being ruled by anyone that we did not elect and cannot remove. Your message of unity was a powerful one. As a matter of fact, if I could have set your speech to music, it would have been Bob Dylan at his very finest. But your message of unity was well received. Here am I sharing a platform with a Protestant minister. Patrick was harangued by a Trotskyite outside for appearing on a platform with me, a Stalinist. Which isn't true, by the way. But even if it was true, this cause of freeing Julian Assange has to unite all right-thinking people, of all political trends, of all faiths and none. Because the best quote this week, it was you, sir, who elicited it from Julian Assange's father. If Julian goes down, you all go down. Every journalist, every broadcaster, every truth teller, every truth seeker, all of you go down if Julian goes down. Of course, the release of Julian Assange is a necessary but not sufficient condition to achieve the mountaintop that Chris just described so eloquently. It's not sufficient, but it is necessary, because if we fail, then the chill, the big chill, will descend upon all of us, and future battles will not be able to be won. The man who's made all of this possible, now 2 sets in London alone, but in the north of Ireland, in Belfast, and in other cities too, putting imperialism on trial, is an Irishman from Derry. I'd like you, please, to allow to wind up the meeting. Dear Gregor, we thank you very much indeed. Greg Sharkey.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming over the last 2 nights. Really appreciate it. And I believe we've well and truly put imperialism on trial over the last 2 nights here in London. And we've also shown that we'll never give up on Julian Assange, and we'll never give up our fight for other whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning and Ed Snowden and any other journalists or broadcasters in the future. We will never give up on our fight for liberty and justice and equality. So I'll use an Irish rebel chant, Chucky our la.
Our day to come.
Christy, if you could talk about what they told the Unity for J account about why they got banned, because I want to make sure we don't miss that.
This might be the first time that we've really gotten to go in depth into this, because we were waiting. We wanted to wait to see if Twitter was going to give us some details or examples. Would have been nice. So there's 3 or 4 points in our very generic email that we received from Twitter before we were reinstated. So first one, aggressive following behavior. Now you can look right now, everybody can look up Unity for J's Twitter right now. We follow approximately 24, 25 Twitter accounts, and we do not have a habit, a pattern of mass following anybody. So how we're interpreting is that they're accusing the Unity for J account of aggressively following others. So as if the account was just mass following people, is how we interpreted this. So we clarified that, hey, you know, since the inception of the account, 24, 25 people is all the account follows. The next, cross-posting tweets across accounts. Our reply back to that was cross-skilled admins of our Twitter teams. So to clarify, preface this, we have the Unity for J main account, and we also have a Unity for J in multiple different languages. These accounts don't post quite as often as the main Unity for J account, but they are there to help spread globally in different languages. And our reply back was that at times they do translate our tweets for their own accounts, for our, basically our sister non-English speaking accounts. And as far as, again, cross-posting seems very vague. We, as an account, Unity for J, retweets our followers, and we retweet relevant posts to our followers so that to help our followers see breaking news, see events and rallies around the world that are being live tweeted, anything like pretty normal functional things that Twitter allows. That's what you're supposed to do on Twitter. You're supposed to retweet. Mass creation of accounts with overlapping use. Again, there were no new creation of Unity for J accounts. They were all initially started in April of 2018, so there hasn't been any new creation of any Unity for J accounts recently. Managing serial bulk accounts with automated application. So we do use one application, and all of our original content tweets are scheduled through that application, and that's the only one we use. Our admin team is scheduling for the Unity for J main account. And like I mentioned, we have the sister non-English speaking accounts that they might do some scheduling here and there. They're not as high traffic. They don't have as many followers. So we don't use a lot of automated application. A lot of it is people behind the screen retweeting and creating. There's 2 people, myself and another admin, who create and take hours to schedule these tweets for the Unity for J account. So yeah, a lot of this email, what they were concerned and accusing our account of, we don't do.
Like, I was waiting for a thing in there where they were like, it seemed like you guys wanted people to follow your account. That's very suspicious behavior. Going on a social media platform and wanting other people to follow you. This is, yeah, no, I was thinking like some of those things too that Andrew brought up, because I schedule out tweets all the time. I tour a lot. I want people to know when I'm coming to their town and where they can get tickets. So I schedule out tweets to go out throughout the week, and I schedule them at different times on different hours, on different days, because I want people to come to the shows. What's suspicious about that? Like,
we've been scheduling tweets since I've been a part of Unity for J for, almost over a year now. Even before I was a part of it, they were using this application to schedule tweets. And funny thing about gaining followers, when we came back online, when our account was restored, I think we're up over 1,000 new followers. So I'm not going to get into any conspiracies, but I will say something different that was happening the week of the suspension was that Unity for J was retweeting a particular hashtag. That hashtag, Defend Media Freedom, was in part of the UK's Global Media Conference. And many of our Free Assange followers and supporters were using that hashtag to express their concern with why Julian Assange was not included in that Global Media Conference. So we were retweeting that hashtag. That was something that was different that happened. So just put in that little factoid out there. Luckily, we had those non-English speaking accounts. So what we did, we moved over to the Unity for G, the German account, for a few days while we were waiting to get restored. We used my personal account for a while, and then we got our team over onto the Unity for G. So we at least were able to stay on Twitter and try to keep pushing out our content, and especially the events and the rallies that were happening over that course of that week they lost that amplification. We have a small following, and in the terms of Twitter, we had around 10,000 followers. Now we're up over 11,000. But it is still a big part of the Free Assange movement to help amplify activists on the ground.
Last month, I went to visit my brother Julian in Belmarsh prison. It had been a year since I had seen him last. I hugged him and he told me this place he was in was hell. I instantly understood what he meant. A yellow inmate's armband wound tightly around his arm exposed how emaciated he had become underneath his baggy prison clothes. In his eyes and voice were the signs that this hell was working its hardest at crushing any hope he had left. This visit, we didn't laugh. There was nothing to laugh about. I held back tears as I realised this could be one of the last times I see him.
How do we put ourselves in the position of a Julian Assange in solitary confinement, or with that kid in Syria or Palestine or Rohingya being blown to bits by these people in this building here?
The behaviour of the British government towards Julian Assange is a disgrace. A profanity on the very notion of human rights. It's no exaggeration to say that the treatment and persecution of Julian Assange is the way dictatorships treat a political prisoner. When I asked Julian what he'd like me to say today, he was adamant. Say it's not just me. It's much wider. It's all of us. It's all journalists and all publishers who do their job who are in danger. The danger Julian Assange faces can easily spread to the present and past editors of The Guardian, The New York Times, Der Spiegel, El País in Spain, the Sydney Morning Herald, and many other newspapers and media outlets around the world that publish the WikiLeaks revelations about the lies and crimes of our governments. By defending Julian Assange, we defend our most sacred rights. Speak up now, or wake up one morning to the silence of a new kind of tyranny. The choice is ours.
Andy. Thank you. You're a lovely man and a great friend. All right, here we go. Can you hear him now? Can you hear his... All right. So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell it from fear, from a cold steel red, a smile from a veil? Do you think you can tell? And did they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, and hot air for cool breeze, cold comfort for change? And did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in the cage? How I wish you were here, Julian. You're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year, running over the same old ground. What have we found? The same old fear. And I wish that you were here. Thank you so much. Julian Assange, we are with you. Free Julian Assange!
An almost science fiction level of oppression on this planet, and the fact that there isn't more resistance to it just shows you how perfect the social engineering is, how incredibly intellectually crushing education is, how people are also exhausted from the, and I'm sure it's not unintentional, from just trying to live. And we can clearly see that they intend to keep him unlawfully until they have the right window of opportunity, either because there's something else happening over there so everyone's distracted, while they then extradite him to the US. And it won't be anything legal that happens to him once he's back in the United States. In fact, if any of you do get the chance to watch the vigils that went on for a year, John Kiriakou, who himself was a whistleblower of the horrific torture program that the CIA was running. If you go to YouTube and look at John Kiriakou discuss what befell him, or indeed anyone that ends up in the courts in Virginia, where unsurprisingly the jury are made up of ex-CIA members, is I want politicians to think carefully, to the courts in England, to the Queen herself, if she has any real power, to all of the politicians in Great Britain. You need to show us that you're for Team Mankind, not Team criminal cartels of this planet.
The candlestick maker, the Prime Minister, or the Queen is obliged to tell everybody when they become aware of the committing of crime. It's the corresponding absolute obligation of society and its officers under constitutionality to protect a person who is enacting that obligation against being got at by anybody, particularly those criminals who don't want the crime to be revealed. The reason this is even more important is that without this duty being enacted by everybody, but if it's interfered with, it means that when you go to vote for somebody, you're going to be short on information. You might be voting for somebody who has it in their mind and heart to involve criminality in their statecraft. That's how severe this is. What any opposition should be doing now, that's half awake and understands anything about George Orwell, is standing up and saying, where is this obligation being enacted? Now, the next Orwellian bit will take you by surprise. It's the very word whistleblower. I've just explained to you, I hope, that everybody has to do this. If they know anything that, like what Julian knows, they have to tell the world about it. Not just authority, everybody, because that's the guarantee. So, the use of the term whistleblower puts this obligation in a small ghetto, and the public comes to think of those people as separate and not just enacting a common right and duty, but possibly questionable or odd. But it has to be understood, and people should, through whatever means we can, ask people, what do you think you ought to do if you become aware of a crime? Are you supposed to shut up? Are you supposed to only tell the police? If you only tell the police and nothing happens, what are you supposed to do then? Major obligation, and we need to do something about it.
Lee Stranahan was here, and he made a speech on how journalism was in jail. That's how he felt about this, and this is exactly how I feel about it, because it's the torture and the persecution of a journalist, of a 7 times nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize Award journalist for doing his job better than anybody else on the planet. It's the persecution and torture of a publisher for perfecting the processes of the Fourth Estate. He has taken them from the analogue age to the digital era and transferred them flawlessly. It's the persecution and torture of the person who's done that, because he created a system that was so good. In the 13 years since WikiLeaks has been since its inception, they have had more stories of global implications than the entire media in the mainstream have for the last 50 years combined. Let's also not forget that this is the persecution and torture of a transgender woman in America, Chelsea Manning, for refusing to testify against her publisher. Something I don't think has ever happened before. Can somebody tell me whether it has? I can't see any reference to it. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have perfected this process of journalism. It gives the people who are whistleblowers, who do want to come forward and do the right thing, so we all know what's going on and we can all make an informed decision. The part of journalism for the whistleblower to be able to come forward totally anonymous, without fear of them being outed as the source, is key to journalism. It's why the fourth estate is protected. Exposing lies which have brought down corrupt governments is something that WikiLeaks have done for the last 13 years. Over 1 million documents they have published every year on average since their inception. They have never ever had to retract anything. What is that but a perfect journalistic outlet? Bravo! In over 12 million documents released, not only do they have this 100% accuracy record, but they've never outed a source, ever. Chelsea Manning is in jail for something else. She confided in somebody else. It wasn't WikiLeaks that did it. This is a perfect publishing organisation. Now, the wind has got up. Our media are not going to stop this from happening. It's key. They're not going to save Julian's life. They would rather continue publishing stories based upon unnamed intelligence sources to keep control of the narrative, just as they have every single time with every single story for the last 20 years and more. Our politicians are not going to stop this from happening, although I would like to say a big thank you to Chris for turning out. I wish we had 649 more of you in the House of Parliament. Our politicians, like I say, are not going to save Julian's life unless we pressure them. It is the people, the good people of the UK, that are not only going to be the ones who can save Julian's life, but can save journalism and save their children's futures. When he was dragged out of his political asylum on that day, a few months ago, in an act of fascism on home soil, let's not forget that, he wasn't screaming, "I'm innocent." He wasn't screaming, "I'm not a rapist." What was he screaming? He was screaming, the UK has no sovereignty, the UK must resist, and that's what me must do, resist! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Thank you. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
From the point of view of international law, this is a continuation of arbitrary detention. So the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that Julian was being arbitrarily detained by Sweden and the United Kingdom. Locking Julian up in solitary confinement in Belmarsh prison, a maximum security prison, is a continuation under those circumstances of arbitrary detention. It's both mentally and physically. He's lost 15 kilos of weight and he's currently in the hospital, the prison hospital, and psychologically he suffers some anxiety because there's no end in sight. There's already been 9 years arbitrary detention, and the extradition process looks like taking 3 to 5 years. Nils Melzer, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, has written that Julian has suffered all of the physical and mental depredations of torture and ought to be released forthwith. The United Kingdom has ignored that and proceeded with extradition case requested by by the United States. The German government and parliamentarians can agitate that the United Kingdom, who's a member of the EU, obey the conventions that it's signed, the conventions on asylum that Germany and the EU and the United Kingdom have signed, and free Julian straight away. Now that's what the German government can do. From my point of view, what the Ecuadorian government did with its spy services, spying on Julian day and night, even bugging the ladies' toilet, is a disgrace and a scandal. And they further embarrassed themselves. Now, the American states, the court of the American states, has ruled firmly that Ecuador and Merino government have broken the law in regard to Julian. So we'll see what happens there in the future. Of course, he's anxious and nervous, but he continues to fight for his freedom, unabated. His fight is unabated. He continues to fight with all his might for his freedom.
The basic bottom line is he's in there because he exposed some war crimes, you know, and he just campaigned for peace. And this cannot be the example, you know, and we can't make that an example to society where we penalise people for that, you know, and not a single person's been convicted for the financial crisis of 2008. Nobody's been convicted for the war crimes committed before then by the Bush era. Nobody's been convicted for the Obama era and everything that the Democrats did. Like, nothing has happened legally. So why trust the legal system, you know, that hasn't come through on any of those things? Or even the press. I think when you know there are people outside who are criminals and you are inside for advocating peace while people that profit from war are outside being celebrated and given Nobel Peace Prize, it hurts. I'm doing an event on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Night, outside the Home Office.
Is there any significance to that?
No, that's just the date I got given. So, yeah, it's a very British day, and I guess, yeah, I will be representing, so turn up.
Clean-shaven and quietly spoken, Julian Assange looked a different man to the one dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy in April. The 48-year-old struggled to state his name and date of birth when asked by the judge.
And you can feel that he is suffering.
His loyal band of supporters turned out in the pouring rain in London.
He is being locked up for nothing more than telling the truth about the war crimes, torture, rendition of the ruling elites.
If Assange is getting in jail, it means the free speech is over.
Assange is being held in a prison near London, awaiting a monumental extradition hearing in February that could decide his fate. The United States accuses him of conspiring with former intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to release classified material. Assange's legal team argued for more time to prepare his defence, but the request was denied.
This is a total violation of a bilateral treaty between the US and the United Kingdom, which basically states that you cannot extradite someone for political offences.
Assange's lawyers claim the US spied on the Australian while he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. Assange told the court he's being denied a computer in prison and can't call his lawyers to discuss his case.
Julian Assange spoke quietly to the judge at the conclusion of the hearing. He appeared downcast as he described his anguish over not being able to access his research and his writings. He says a superpower has an unfair advantage.
Asked whether he understood what was happening in court, he replied, "Not really. I don't understand how this is equitable. It's very difficult where I am to do anything, but these people have unlimited resources. I can't think properly." Assange was given a dramatic send-off on his way back to prison. He'll be back in court next month. Bridget.
It was argued today that an extension should be given. There was not a sufficient time for Julian and his lawyers to prepare the defense within the timeline set. That was, the judge turned it down, which is disappointing. Julian said himself, the superpower has had 10 years to prepare the case. And for the last 6 months, he's been sitting in Belmarsh prison without any access to documents, legal documents, not a computer. How on earth can that be fair? That's easily answered. It's not fair at all. Julian's lawyers said today that they wanted to argue that this case should be dismissed, as it should be, and on a basis of an international treaty or a bilateral treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom. A treaty, extradition treaty, which basically states that you cannot extradite anybody for a political offense. And that's exactly what is being done here. It's shameful that we should actually be spending time here in court.
Je suis un gilet jaune et avec beaucoup de gilets jaunes, on est venu aujourd'hui en soutien à Julian Assange, dont le combat est le nôtre. C'est le combat de Julian depuis 9 ans maintenant. C'est le combat de tous. Il se bat pour tous les citoyens du monde entier, pour leur dignité, leur liberté, la liberté d'informer, liberté de la presse, liberté d'expression, liberté d'investigation, la vérité, la justice, truth and justice everywhere. Thank you, Julian. We love you and we want you to be free now, quickly.
Julian Assange est un symbole de liberté, de parole, d'expression, de liberté entravée. C'est un scandale, sa situation est un scandale absolu. Nous sommes très choqués en France de la façon dont il est traité. C'est un lanceur d'alerte qui sacrifie sa vie pour nous, pour la liberté d'informer, d'être informé, c'est fondamental.
Stay strong. Stay strong, Julian. We're fighting for you. We won't let them do it to you. We won't let them do this to you. Stay strong. Remember, we're here for you. Remember that. Stay strong. You will be free. Governments will not win. Wow, I can't believe it.
You can talk. Talk. You can talk. Talk.
We won't let them do this to you. Because your freedom is our freedom. You are the greatest journalist of our time. History will remember you forever, no matter what happens. But I know I'm positive that you will be free.
Our great champion, one of our great champions in the cause of democracy, of course, has been Julian Assange. And I stand foursquare behind Julian Assange and have demanded his immediate release. It's an absolute stain, it seems to me, on the British state, on the British society, on British democracy, that we are incarcerating the man at all. He was subject to a custodial sentence for skipping bail, but we all know why Julian skipped bail, but now he's served his sentence. And yet he's still being incarcerated in the high security prison of Belmarsh. This is outrageous. We're behaving like a tin pot dictatorship rather than a modern democracy. And in the front page of the Morning Star yesterday, just to add insult to injury, the prison inspectors rage at Assange jail's safety failings. We're incarcerating a man who's done an incredible service to the world, to ordinary people, in terms of shining a light on the war crimes, the abuse of state power, the abuse of corporate power around the world. And he is somebody that we should be venerating, not incarcerating. And so it is crucially important, therefore, that we do everything that we can to bring pressure to bear in the democracies in which we live to ensure that our democracy is actually delivering what it's supposed to do, the will of the people.
Anybody who's watching this, wherever it's been streamed, to speak out on this case, wherever you are, to send a card to Julian in Belmarsh and let him know that people are thinking of him. The extradition case will begin for real in February. We want to build a people's movement, a genuine transnational global campaign of solidarity that defends genuine journalism and defends someone who is a hero of the movement against war and the movement against imperialism. So I'm really, in conclusion, urging you all to come on board that battle. We'll redouble our efforts and we hope that everybody else does, because there's a hell of a lot at stake here.
And if enough energy is put into it by enough people, we can challenge what seems like the inevitable of Julian Assange rotting in the US prison for the rest of his life. On Friday night, it was an absolute pleasure to listen to John, Julian's father. It was very moving. I don't know what age he is. He's in his late 70s probably. But the idea that in your late 70s, you'd be going around, flying around Europe, trying to convince people to get off their arse and protest to try and save your son. He's a beautiful man. We were in the Ecuadorian embassy way back, shortly after Julian gone in, and we were very impressed with him. How shocking and how worrying is it that our mainstream media are so silent? And their trade is at risk. This isn't just about Julian. This is the chilling of anyone who dares to put in public information or put information that the big powers don't want to be made public, putting it in the hands of the ordinary people. This is something they don't want to be happening. And they are scared. They're spineless and they're very disappointed. We all need to do more. We can all make the world a better place. A little bit every day. We can all convince a couple of people that we know to do a little more. But the trajectory that the world is on at the moment is not sustainable. Things have to change. We will not possibly continue as it's going. The sooner the people stand up and make their voice heard, the better. Thank you.
The biggest war in the West is not physical, it's electronic. It's the wars proposed through the media to create the narrative for humanitarian intervention. It's the propaganda of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It's 9/11 in Afghanistan. It's Assad killing his own people. It's babies taken out of warm incubators in Kuwait by Iraqi soldiers and left to die on the cold floors. A story told to Congress by a very believable young Kuwaiti volunteer nurse, which led the Congress in America to approve the war in Iraq. Turns out she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to America and the UN. So the media creates a narrative, a compelling storyline for regime change, mainly false, like the discredited white helmets founded by British ex-soldier John Le Mesurier. The Western governments encourage street protests, which they have some control over via the leadership of the protests. Siege, financial embargoes, trade wars and coups are their tried and trusted methods to achieve their aims. Our media and many non-governmental organisations are complicit in the deceit and lies that are used to pre-program or consent for these wars. The real terrorists are not in Bora Bora, they are in Whitehall, Washington and Tel Aviv. How do we know this? Because thanks to the courage of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, we have transcripts, we have collateral damage videos, and we have emails. We have Hillary Clinton, we came, we saw, he died, accompanied with dynamic, victorious laughter at the death of Saddam Hussein. I say no war, no regime change operations, no sieges, no financial or military interventions, no apartheid Israel, and no extradition of Julian Assange, a man who, through speaking his truth to power by exposing war crimes committed in all our names by all our governments, his truth set us free, but they are trying to incarcerate him for 175 years in the belly of the American penal system, where he may never see freedom again. Perhaps Gitmo awaits Julian Assange. Freedom of the press is paramount, and freedom of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning and any others is essential in a free world. We must end wars, live in peace and stop imperialist interventions for profit. We must free Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And finally, to paraphrase a quote, in the end, it is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends that will defeat us all.
Make some noise for Julian Assange! One decision! One decision! One decision!
We are faced here with a great task, all of us together, to ensure that Julian is free from the persecution that's gone on now for 9 years.
This is not just about Julian Assange, a courageous publisher. It is about freedom of press. It is about freedom of speech. It is about human rights. It is about democracy.
And this is not about me, it's about Julian Assange. And he says it's not about him, and it's about you. We just want the right to have respect for any living being. We don't give a fuck if they're American, Russian, Iraqis, fucking Syrians. We don't care. We just don't want war. Do not extradite Julian Assange.
Julian Assange's crime was nothing more than doing journalism, reporting on the misdeeds of the powerful, and he is being punished in the harshest possible way for that, and that is a travesty. He should be released. Julian Assange was instrumental in undermining the case for the Iraq War in the release of that famous video of the attack helicopter going around killing journalists in Iraq. Now that's the stuff that ends unjust, offensive, illegal wars.
I actually saw Americans cold-bloodedly murder somebody, in fact a few people, right? And if that's their modus operandi, then the very least we should do is know about it. And why not? Tell me why not.
they say we have free speech until you actually want to speak, and then they start trying to take you out. What Julian Assange exposed is really important because, you know, like a lot of us don't know, a lot of us don't necessarily have the time to find out or the paths to find out to this level. So the fact that he just made it more transparent just gives people like a choice to like think for themselves. Like musicians that I respect like are coming and supporting as well really means a lot, you know. If they can do it, why can't I? Do you know what I mean?
Once again, we gather outside the Belmarsh prison to protest at Julian Assange's incarceration. We also protest against his potential extradition to the US, which I think is very, very unfair. Here on the left we have Belmarsh Magistrates Court. Judge Bereza has transferred the main extradition court hearing in February to this court here. We are very concerned that our constitutional rights will be violated by not having access to the court hearing. We saw him in court on the 21st of October at Westminster Magistrates Court, and he didn't look very well. Very, very concerned. We wonder what is going on inside Belmarsh prison. Is he getting the health care that he deserves? He is a prisoner on remand. He should really not be there at all. He's a publisher. He needs to be free. He needs to be free to seek the type and quality of health care that he chooses to. In an environment that it is conducive for his well-being. Obviously, Belmarsh prison is not the right environment for him.
I haven't seen and read anything about this in the media. So the first time I was there, it was in front of the Home Office, where Roger Waters from the Pink Floyd was singing I Wish You Were Here for Julian Assange, and it was quite shocking for me not seeing anything about it in the media the day afterwards.
I think that Julian Assange is he's a very brave guy, he's a fantastic journalist, he's one of the sort of, he's basically being put in prison because he's too good, that's the problem. He's the promise of a free media, which we haven't really had before. We've just had propaganda, and I think that's basically why these sort of powerful states such as Britain and the US can't live with him.
Thank you for joining us today. For our young viewers in Germany, could you just briefly introduce your work and how you got involved with Julian Assange?
I'm the Special Rapporteur on Torture of the United Nations. I'm appointed by states to visit prisons, to evaluate the compliance of states with the prohibition of torture worldwide. I also deal with individual torture victims, try to protect them from torture and extradition to countries where they might be tortured. And that's exactly where I got involved with the Assange case, because he's threatened to be extradited to the United States, where human rights organizations agree that the conditions of detention that he would be facing and the trial he would be facing would be clearly unfair and amounting to torture and other cruel and human-degrading treatment.
You mentioned in your speech you had a very different opinion, and most of the people have a different opinion of Assange because most of the media focuses a lot of personal issues. Talk about what changed your opinion about Assange when you met him.
Well, when his lawyers initially asked me to intervene on his behalf with the government, I declined. And spontaneously, I had the impression, oh, this is this narcissist, this rapist, this hacker, this spy. He's just going to manipulate me. And so they had to send me a couple of pieces of evidence and to ask me, almost to beg me to look at it. And when I did, I started to see that really the public narrative that we know about Assange has been fabricated. It's not true. The evidence is contradictory. In fact, the whole rape charges have been fabricated by the Swedish police, and the women who are supposedly his victims even said so in text messages that exist, that the police has railroaded and pushed them into fabricating this rape charge, which has kept him in confinement for 9 years and has completely turned the public opinion against him. And most importantly, it has turned away the focus of public opinion about what is really important, namely what Julian Assange has published, the secrets he has revealed, which have given evidence of war crimes by these states, war crimes that have been proven but have not been prosecuted. Instead, the person who has exposed these crimes is being prosecuted and faces 175 years in prison.
We're discussing here whether Assange or someone else has done something wrong or not. But what about the war crimes? We are living in a time when our own war crimes are no longer prosecuted. We know that we have conducted aggressive wars. We've hanged people in Nuremberg for this. 175 years for whatever we're accusing Mr. Assange of. Certainly is not violence, certainly is not genocide, certainly is not massacring civilians or torturing anybody. And people for genocide in The Hague, they received 35 or 45 years. I'm genuinely outraged.
117 physicians from 18 countries demanded Julian Assange's alleged torture to end before it becomes too late. The WikiLeaks publisher faces up to 175 years in US prison, and many fear that his degrading condition might stop him from actively participating in his trials. Experts suggest that the WikiLeaks publisher is facing acute torture in the UK prison and needs immediate medical attention. An eminent medical journal, The Lancet, published a letter from 117 physicians and psychologists from across the world, demanding an end to the psychological torture of Assange. The letter also indicates that the expert medical opinions have been consistently ignored in Assange's case. UN medical expert Niels Melzer, who specializes in assessing torture victims, said that he will submit a report on Assange's psychological torture to the UN by the end of February. A copy of the letter was also sent to Australian Foreign Affairs Minister Marie Spain. This coincides with the arrival of Australian MPs Andrew Wilkie and George Robert Christensen, who are on a privately funded trip to meet the WikiLeaks founder in the London prison.
In this case, there are 3 levels on which my mandate is clearly involved. First of all, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed systematic torture that has not been prosecuted. So impunity for torture is a clear violation of the Convention Against Torture, and I need to intervene in this matter. Secondly, we have examined Julian Assange and we have medical evidence that he has been exposed to psychological torture and is continually now exposed to psychological torture, which again is clearly within my mandate to intervene on his behalf. Thirdly, if Julian Assange gets extradited to the United States, he's likely to be tortured until the day he dies. And that, to prevent that, again, I'm called to intervene. I want to visit him personally, and I will take with me 2 doctors. So I have independent, medical, science-based, information. Because I knew it was going to be politicized, and a lot of pressure would be on my mandate to come up with some conclusions. And so I didn't expect to find torture, to be honest. I thought, well, this is, the UK, they've arrested him, they'll treat him well, maybe there's some issues, procedural issues, but
I was genuinely shocked then that we found all the symptoms that you would find typically in a person who has been exposed to psychological torture. And in that context, I have to stress that psychological torture is by no means torture light. It is very serious. In fact, psychological torture was initially systematically developed by the Nazis. When they were not able to break resistance fighters with physical means, they developed psychological torture because it was even worse. So psychological torture is a way of torture that aims directly at your personality. All torture wants to manipulate your mind. They want to get you to confess. They want you to intimidate you. It's always about your mind in the end. But traditional means of torture go through physical pain and suffering in order to convince you to confess. Psychological torture tries to get you to a regression, to destabilize your mind and your emotions to the point where you regress to the level of childhood, and your emotional attachment starts to be transferred to the torturer. And it sounds incredible, but it works. That's why people are isolated from outside influences. So they are focused entirely on the torturer, and their feelings will be manipulated. They will be rewarded and punished according to arbitrary schemes. They will be destabilized. They will be put in constant anxiety. And in the end, it causes the personality to regress and to collapse. Now, there are various variations of this. I think in the case of Julian Assange, what we've seen here is that someone who has been systematically isolated socially and then also increasingly physically, that has been exposed to an intense and concerted campaign of defamation that he was not allowed to defend himself against, so which obviously also was connected with a lot of shame and humiliation. That's an inherent part of psychological torture. And then this constant anxiety to be extradited to a country where he will be subjected to draconian punishments for having conducted journalism. And knowing that he will never get a fair trial, and he's likely to spend the rest of his life in the so-called Supramax prison, where all human rights organizations of any name and respectability agree that these conditions of detentions amount to torture and other ill treatment. And so this caused an intense anxiety and a constant stress level that is typical for psychological torture, an overstimulation of the nervous system medically that you then that causes neurological and cognitive damage. And so that's a very serious method of torture, and I'm absolutely convinced that it was deliberate. The purpose here was not to make Julian confess. The purpose here was to intimidate the rest of the world, because intimidation is the principal purpose of most torture that's being used in the world. It's not interrogation, because the interrogator knows that if he tortures the victim, he might not get the truth. He's not stupid, but he knows that he will intimidate. For this, torture is very effective, and for this it is being used throughout the world. And so just as women are raped on the village square to intimidate the population, like this, torture is being used against Julian Assange to intimidate the world, to show them, if ever you get the idea to disclose our secrets and to expose our dirty laundry to the world, this is what's going to happen to you. I came out with a press statement on the 31st of May, and within an hour, Jeremy Hunt, the then Foreign Secretary, thought it was appropriate to respond by Twitter and to say that I shouldn't interfere with the UK judicial system and that Julian Assange was free to leave the Ecuadorian embassy at any time. Well, I have responded to him, and I said that, with all due respect, sir, but Mr. Assange was about as free to leave as someone who is sitting on a rubber boat in a shark pool. Now, the same Foreign Secretary Hunt had invited me to visit Julian Assange. I knew I was going to report on this, so it was really bad faith to accuse me of interfering with judicial procedures. I asked
the UK to investigate this, because the UK is a party to the Convention Against Torture, and Article 12 of that convention obliges all the states parties to conduct a prompt and independent investigation as soon as there are reasonable grounds to believe that torture may have been committed. Now, if a special rapporteur of the United Nations, together with 2 medical experts, visits a detainee for 4 hours and comes to the conclusion the person has been subjected to torture, you don't have to agree with him, but it certainly is reasonable grounds to believe. If that isn't, what is? And the UK did not conduct any investigations. It took them 5 months after my visits to respond to me in a decent, well, manner, just written. But that was, it was a 1-page letter just rejecting any allegation of torture and claiming that Julian Assange is being treated in accordance with English law. Now, that's not the type of response that is appropriate when the UN rapporteur asks precise questions as to how the conduct of the UK government is compliant with human rights law. When I actually raised concerns, well, I expect an answer for them to explain how it complies with human rights law, but they didn't. They just rejected all allegations, and since then I've not had any communication with the government. Instead, they talk to the High Commissioner of Human Rights, complaining, that they're not happy with my engagement in the Assange case. Now, my mandate is not to make states happy. My mandate is to report to them my concerns and to, challenge them to comply with their obligations. Yes, well, I did a second intervention in late October and also did a press release then on the 1st November when I was worried for his life. And I also reminded the UK government that Julian Assange was no longer a convict, that he had served his sentence for bail violation in the end of September, should have been released, and that he was now only detained for preventative purposes in relation to the US extradition request. Now, given that there is no way that this extradition could lawfully go forward, because he's being sought for espionage, which is by definition a political offense, and the UK law prohibits clearly extraditions for political offenses. If extradited, Julian Assange would face ill treatment, conditions of detentions that clearly are in violation of the Convention Against Torture. So you can't lawfully extradite a person to a country like that. It's recognized internationally. It's prohibited by the Convention Against Torture. It's prohibited by the European Convention for Human Rights. It's prohibited by the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. It's prohibited by customary law. So in any case, he cannot be lawfully extradited. So why can he can no longer be detained? Because he's only being detained for that purpose. So in that sense, there is no legal basis for his detention, and he needs to be released. I don't think so. I have to say I'm shocked to have to say that, but because I'm a professor at the UK university, and I was actually proud of that legal system. But what I see now is that the judiciary, in this case, is either unwilling or unable to guarantee due process. He's not had access to his legal documents. He has not have access to his American lawyers, and he's sought by the US for extradition. He has had very limited access to his lawyers in the UK, to the point where they say they cannot prepare his defense. I mean, we're in a rule of law country, and we're seeing here is a witch hunt and a trial that is a travesty of justice. Well, you see, first they came for Assange, then they came for Greenwald, and now I hear they're coming for the BBC. BBC's budget is being cut, right? But the BBC has still not understood what's going on. In a recent interview with Joe Corey, when Joe Corey was exposing the due process violations happening in the Assange case, they virtually suppressed his statements and trying to interrupt him in order for him not to express this criticism. I think the BBC should be careful that there are still people left behind to defend it when they're next in line. After my visit, I informed the prison immediately that the state of health is serious and he needs to be stabilized. He needs to have access to a psychiatrist of his confidence that doesn't work for the government. And obviously he needs to have access to his lawyers. Now that doesn't sound like a medical treatment, but you see, when the inability to deal with cases that might, expose you to torture for the rest of your life, if that inability to have access to lawyers and to be able to prepare your defense will exponentially increase the pressure you're under. So access to lawyers here would be a means to alleviate the pressure on him and therefore also diminish the effect of the ill treatment. So that is something that you need to see when you examine a person like this, and that's part of the cause. Part of the ill treatment was to deliberately deprive him of access to his legal documents, to his legal team, because that would have given him some sense of control over the situation. And that's precisely the purpose of psychological torture: deprive the victim of all senses of control and make him completely dependent on their torture.
It is a sentence, and no one is facing a longer sentence than Julian Assange for doing that precisely. Now, Julian has gained the right to quote from another prisoner, from another time, from another enemy of empire, Mahatma Gandhi. Julian, like Gandhi, could say, "You can chain me, you can torture me, you can destroy my body, but you can't imprison my mind." Well, Julian, you have won the right to say this, but we don't have the right to agree with him. We have a duty. We have a duty to stop them from destroying Julian's body. We have a duty not to let them continue his torture. Comrades, first they came for Julian. Next, they will come for our comrades, our friends, our neighbors. Immediately after that, they will come for the good people of The Guardian and of the BBC. They will go after anyone who dares challenge the right of power of the oligarchy without frontiers to commit crimes against humanity in our name without our knowledge. Do you remember some months ago, Mike Pompeo? Let me remind you who that gentleman is. He was Trump's first choice for CIA director and current state. He described WikiLeaks as a non-governmental, hostile intelligence service. You know what? He's right. This is exactly what WikiLeaks is. But also, it is exactly what any self-regarding newspaper, television station, radio station should be: a non-governmental intelligence service on behalf of citizens that are looking critically at their government. Dan Ellsberg, that wonderful whistleblower, one of my greatest heroes, and Noam Chomsky, another hero of ours. They warned the journalists who are failing so spectacularly to defend Julian today. They warned them, you are next. You are on a hit list with a ranking order, the hit list of President Trump, who considers all of the press to be the enemy of the people. When you turned a blind eye to Julian's torture, you are consenting to your own emasculation. That is our message to the BBC. That is our message to The Guardian. Of course, you do not need me to lecture you, because by being here, you have proven that you know all that. But you've also acquired a duty, we all have, to let into the secret those who are not here today. Because, Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy, are not evil people in smoke-filled rooms plotting against good people. No. Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy,
is apathy. It is fatigue. It is good people, too tired, too exhausted, too disheartened, working 0-hour contracts, whatever, to be able to expend the energy that you and I have the privilege of expending today. It is banality. It is people who are neither good nor bad working in these offices in Whitehall. No, they're not evil. They're just banal. Too banal to care. We have to make them care. On a slightly personal note, I got to know Julian Assange when he took an interest in me, because some years ago, some of you may have heard about this, I blew the whistle on the European finance ministers' cabal who were plotting behind closed doors, turning against the interests of their people, not just the Greek people, but the German people, the French people, everyone, behind closed doors. On the 10th of March, in a few days' time, one of the projects that Julian and I started is going to see the light of day. Watch out for EuroLeaks. Soon after we met, together with Brian Eno, who hates being in this very small clique, but it's not a small clique because, as Brian knows, what we started with Julian Assange in February 2016 in Berlin, the Democracy in Europe movement, now has tens of thousands of members everywhere. As we speak, a similar demonstration is taking place in Athens with our members of parliament representing the movement that Julian Assange helped to put together. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in Belmarsh, visiting together with John Shifton, Julian's magnificent father, Julian. I will go in there with trepidation and a sense of guilt because I'm going to walk in there, but I'm also going to walk out of there. And I'm going to relay to him your spirit, the spirit of everyone from every European country and beyond. Because you may be out of the EU, but you are firmly embedded in Europe's progressive movement. Friends, comrades, as my friend and Julian's friend, Philip Adams from Australia, said recently, we are not going to let them turn Julian into a latter-day man in the iron mask or a man forgotten in an iron cell. So stiffen your upper lip. We are in the business of allowing unalloyed, unarmed truth to have the final word. Because we are in the business of creating the circumstances so that Julian's sentence will end neither with a bang nor with a whimper, but with a magnificent full stop. Thank you.
The torture of Julian, as witnessed by Nils Melzer, the United Nations rapporteur on torture, all of those reports are available. That is what will happen to journalists, publishers and publications if this extradition, this political extradition of Julian Assange is successful.
I want to read through part of this statement because it came out on March 27th. Doctors for Assange strongly condemns Wednesday's decision by the UK District Judge Vanessa Barrister to deny bail to Julian Assange. Despite our prior unequivocal statements that Mr. Assange is at increased risk of severe illness and death were he to contract the coronavirus, and the evidence of medical experts, Barrister dismissed the risk, citing the UK's guidelines for prisons in responding to the global pandemic. I have no reason not to trust this advice as both evidence-based and reliable and appropriate. Notable, however, Barrister did not address that the increased risk to Mr. Assange relative to the UK general prison population, let alone the prisoners at Her Majesty's Prison Belmarsh, where Assange is incarcerated. Nor did she address the rapidly emerging medical and legal consequence that vulnerable and low-risk prisoners should be released immediately. And I'll drop this link into chat for everybody because I would encourage you to continue to read through it. On the idea of sending out the hashtags, link these as well, or link this. Go in, take a paragraph or a couple sentences out of it because none of it is wasted space, and put it into your tweets. And go through and over the course of this next week, try to put out tweets with all of these in them, with every line if you can, or the ones that you find the most powerful, and use those hashtags for the corresponding countries with Save Assange COVID-19. Because at this point, it's just additional torture. The fact that he can't even meet with his attorneys except over a non-secure video link, where there is no human interaction at this point. Even, I'm assuming, with the guards that would be bringing him food because of risk of contamination. So I just wanna make sure that this stays on the top of everybody's radar because there's people around the world that are working to get this man free, and I just hope that everyone in our audience will take the initiative to at the very least, put out some tweets about this, and at the very best, use whatever time you're allowed outside of the house to go put up signs, to pass out flyers to people if you're standing in a crowded parking or a crowded shopping area, and just be the person that makes this conversation happen around you, because without that, the message isn't going to get spread.
Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and here is the latest on Julian Assange. The UK Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, announced on Saturday, April 4th, the release of up to 4,000 low-risk inmates in UK prisons. This is all in an attempt to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in UK prisons. Selected low-risk offenders who were set to be released in just a few months will be released in a few days, and they will also be placed on GPS tracking devices. Now, this decision came just a few days after England's prison charities warned that a failure to act in this situation would lead to mass deaths. Currently, in the UK prison system, 15 staff members and 88 inmates have tested positive for COVID-19. Not to mention, the country's Prime Minister Boris Johnson tested positive for the virus back in March. However, the UK Ministry of Justice has confirmed that the WikiLeaks founder and journalist Julian Assange is not eligible for this temporary release, as he is not serving a custodial sentence, but rather Assange is being held in Belmarsh prison on remand after serving a lengthy 50-week sentence for violating bail back in 2012. Now, the government is aiming to expedite cases for prisoners who are being held on remand, yet this too does not impact Assange's case. Assange, who has suffered from respiratory tract infections and has a chronic lung condition, was denied bail last month in front of Judge Vanessa Baraitser. The next procedural hearing is set to take place on Tuesday, April 7th at Westminster Magistrates Court. I will continue to follow this case closely, providing you all with updates. Therefore, make sure you do subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and I will see you all next time.
Begin today with an update on the video released last week by WikiLeaks that depicts U.S. troops killing 12 people, including 2 Reuters employees, and injuring at least 2 children in a suburb of Baghdad.
That's a weapon. Yeah. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Impact was extraordinary. Because if you watch it through...
Come on, fire!
There's nowhere to go after it.
Keep shooting.
You can't be rationalized.
Keep shooting.
It can't be excused.
Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards. Nice. 26, Crazy Horse 18.
Collateral murder shifted the perspective almost immediately.
1-8. We also have one individual appears to be wounded, trying to crawl away.
Roger, we got the
Okay. Come on, buddy.
All I gotta do is pick up a weapon.
Crazy Horse 1-8, request permission to engage individual.
Picking up the wounded. Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot. Let us shoot.
This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
1-8, engage. Clear.
Come on.
Clear. Clear.
Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
Salah Mutasher is the man who was driving that van. He was taking his two children, aged 9 and 6 at the time, to school.
Roger, I've got 11 Iraqi KIAs, one small child wounded, over.
Damn. Oh well.
02 in flight, free change zone 1.
02, free change cruise zone. Crest of 20, Commando 89ers active, port arrival 311.
There is no mention of any civilians. Everybody is categorized as enemy combatant, and that is the usual approach. It comes out of the material from the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War as well. It is to lower the numbers of what they call collateral damage, which is rather an awkward term for killed civilians.
We have clear evidence for war crimes having been committed. We have clear evidence for torture having been committed on a large scale. We have clear evidence for corruption. We have clear evidence for a host of human rights violations. And there have been no prosecutions, no investigations by any of those states that scream so loudly about the rule of law in this case.
The importance of releasing this video in general is that it encaptured so many elements of the Iraq War, and in effect I think that collateral murder has become iconic and it's a symbol. This video, alongside maybe the images from Abu Ghraib, are in a sense what the Napalm Girl photo tells us about the Vietnam War. So it captures so many elements of the callousness, the bloodlust, and the horror of the Iraq War.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle.
That's right.
One of the reasons why this is important now is the fact that the exposure of these rules are an element in the indictment against Julian Assange.
This sets a dangerous precedent for all media organisations and journalists in Europe and elsewhere around the world. This precedent means that any journalist can be extradited for prosecution in the United States for having published truthful information about the United States.
Just looking at prison, the prison environment is like a petri dish for this virus, and it will spread widely. We have all the prison guards going in and out. A third of them now, at least, are not showing up for work because they either have the virus or are in isolation. So this is becoming untenable, the situation. It's absolutely absurd that more prisoners are not released right now, and of course Julian Assange should be released immediately. Well, 2 weeks ago, once he decided to not grant him bail, he cited the fact that there was no cases of COVID inside the prison in Belmarsh, and she had full faith in the prison authorities in controlling the situation. Only a few hours later, that same afternoon, the first instances were confirmed inside Belmarsh, and they've been growing ever since. And might I add, I am absolutely certain that the cases are much more than are reported. Simply, they're not testing the prison population to know exactly what is going on there. It is absolutely absurd to not take into account the situation and not to move the hearing, which is planned for May 18th, further down the road. It's not just the situation probably will be still very bad, and there's a lot of witnesses that have to fly in, and it's not possible to continue without their presence in the courtroom. Also, keep in mind that now for 3 weeks, the lawyers have not been able to see Julian Assange. They have not been able to meet him, pass documents on, and actually discuss the case. How on earth can you continue as nothing has happened when the lawyers have not been able to confer with their client? This is absurd, and the tone that the magistrate judge Vanessa Barretzer was keeping to in her hearing yesterday did not ring very solid. If you think about the situation, she was talking about things becoming normal in the court system in 2 weeks' time. Everybody that is just reading the news and watching what's going on in society knows that that's not going to happen. But what we have been repeatedly saying, and of course, which is known, that his health is in a very bad, he's in very bad shape. He's a very vulnerable individual, especially to virus such as the COVID. He has an underlying lung condition, and he would be even if outside the society considered at grave risk. So. Being in this situation where he is basically, and his life is in danger on every day and every hour that goes by without him being released on bail and allowed to step outside out of this enclosement is a death threat.
Hello, sweetheart.
Who are all these people?
Come say hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm Stella Morris. I am Julian Assange's partner. I met him in 2011. We got together in 2015. And we have 2 children, Max and Gabriel. I had received an email from Jennifer Robinson, who put out a request through her Oxford network that the case that she was involved in, which involved Julian Assange, needed more people. Our first meeting was in Paddington at the Frontline Club. I was scheduled to be at an interview. I didn't know who I was going to meet. I rang the doorbell and went up the stairs, and he was sitting alone at a table, which really came as a surprise, because at the time he was already a world famous figure. And he asked me who I was, and I said I had come for an interview. And he thought I was an American journalist who was there to interview him. So he immediately was quite guarded, and who was this woman who had just walked into the room? And I said, no, I'm here to be interviewed, which immediately relaxed him, and he offered me the tea he was drinking. And then other people came in, and I talked about my background, the fact that I was a fluent Swedish speaker, the fact that I had studied law, and started working with Baltasar Garzon, who was the international coordinator of Julian's international legal team. In 2012, he took political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. Just like my language skills in Swedish had been relevant for the Swedish case, my Spanish language skills, fluent in Spanish, became important for the political asylum context. I had been in the embassy almost every single day and got to know Julian very well. And in 2015 we got together.
You started a relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we fell in love, and this is a person that I knew well by then, the person I know the most in this world, and he's extraordinary. He's generous, and he's very tender and loving.
On the computer, yeah?
On my phone.
On your phone?
Yes.
Yeah, you like to watch that.
On my cameras.
On your cameras?
Yes.
Forming a family was a deliberate decision to kind of break down those walls around him and see life, imagine a life beyond that prison. And so, while for many people it would seem insane to start a family in that context, for us it was the sane thing to do. It was what keeps things real. And it does. It grounds me. And when Julian sees the children, it gives him a lot of peace and nurturing and support, and that's good. And they're very happy children.
In the bag.
In the bag.
Oh, my Tyson died.
I think we're both traumatized by what's happened over the last few years, actually. I compare it to being in a war zone, constant relentless attacks, that there are operations underway, and it's not some crazed conspiracy theory, it's part of the reality of the context in which everything to do with Julian exists. And just like in war, people fall in love and decide to live their lives in an act of rebellion, I think. Falling in love is kind of an act of rebellion in a context where there's a lot of attempts to destroy your life and your reason for doing what you're doing. This is the younger one, Max, with the cat. And yeah, that's a little one. There's a big little one. That's a big one. Kind of a same picture. They're quite similar looking when you look at them like that. And the big one has the older one is actually very much like Julian. He looks a lot like Julian, especially around the eyes, the kind of the eyebrows, and the gaze is very much Julian's. The little one looks more like me, and he has Julian's ears and Julian's size because he's very big. And he looks like his brother, but of the two of them, the older one is very Julian. Yeah. I've seen him in prison, and I'm struggling to think of how to explain it, why he's there, and so on. you also don't want to, you want them to feel a positive feeling about going there as well. So it's a bit of a charade. I don't think people understand the extreme situation and pressure that we've been under, because Julian is a public figure, because everything about him is newsworthy. Anything can be used against him and has been used against him. And so this was a real dilemma about having a relationship in these circumstances. Means you try to insulate it and protect it as fiercely as you can. And that's what I've done, because that's kind of a haven, an oasis from the crazy context. I knew there was some spying going on. When I found out that my baby was targeted, as a guard actually went up to me and told me that they were trying to steal the DNA, I realized that I couldn't really protect my family. Even if I took all these steps, more steps than most people, to try to preserve our privacy and our security and Julian's safety, ultimately. In a way, it was beyond my control, and that was very difficult to realize. I understood that the powers that were against Julian were ruthless and there were no bounds to it, because there's a lawlessness around it. And, they were after my baby's DNA, but what else are they after? And that's partly why I feel now that I have to do this, because I've taken so many steps for so many years, and I feel like Julian's life might be coming to an end. It's been 10 years of breaking someone down, of trying to destroy his life, and it's a well-known pattern, whistleblowers, people who expose the powerful, they destroy them. And we know this when this happens. And somehow everyone has failed Julian. They've all failed Julian. They've taken every negative angle they have been able to. You can do that to anyone. You can destroy anyone like that. You just need to start over-analyzing them. Sweetie.
So much of this is about security theatre and the demonstrable power of the state, and cowing opposition through showing the power of the state. The torture of Julian Assange and the extreme conditions in which he's being held, his mistreatment in Belmarsh jail, his being confined to a glass box. To a large extent, they're doing it because they can, and they're doing it to show us that they can, to demonstrate the power of the state and to make us afraid. That fear is obviously particularly aimed at Tristan, for example, because it's meant to terrify Tristan about what's liable to happen to him and to the other people in WikiLeaks if WikiLeaks continues its work. It's a demonstration of it's an act of terror. It's designed to terrify us into stopping opposition to the security state and to terrify us into never again releasing evidence of war crimes. And I think when you look at the sheer malicious, the malign way that the judge Vanessa Bereza is conducting the court, and several of us here have been in the court, and all of us, I think, have just been absolutely stunned by the relentless and remorseless hostility of the judges and of the court, and the lack of even the appearance of civility that normally cloaks the horror of state violence that lies behind court proceedings. All that is an act of terror. It's an act designed to terrify us out of resistance, and that is the purpose of it. And the other thing that absolutely horrifies me, and we've heard several people make comparisons to dictatorships and make comparisons to Nazi Germany, and it's not just, as Peter rightly said, that the mainstream media doesn't stand up for a fellow journalist, doesn't stand up for somebody whose only crime is to release state secrets, and state secrets of, showing state atrocities. It's not just they don't stand up for him, they openly attack him, and they do so with glee and hatred. And that is something which I find very difficult to deal with. And again, it goes down to the disappearance of the civilities of society that we all took as a feature of the kind of society we believed we were living in. The attacks on Julian by the mainstream media are just awful. The attitude to Julian of the mainstream media is awful. You go onto Twitter on any discussion of Julian Assange and you will see countless mainstream media blue-ticked journalists on Twitter coming in to make jokes and callous remarks and nasty things about, oh, he's a rapist, all this absolute nonsense, things which actually they do know to be untrue, but they make them anyway because it's somehow an important part of their group identity as accepted members of the establishment to kick out at those who are other, who are not members of the establishment. And that direction of hatred and abuse at the other is absolutely a sign that we are going in the same direction as Nazi Germany. I'm obviously not saying we're all the way there yet, but it is very, very scary. I find the hatred and vilification, both in the court, the unrelenting attitude of the government, the unrelenting attitude of the magistrate. And I should say, one thing that was very clear to me, particularly during the week-long start of the extradition hearing, is that Vanessa Bereza is being ventriloquized. It's not just that she's coming in with her judgments written out, which is true. We go for this ludicrous charade where she comes in with already written judgments in hand. She sits there for 3 hours barely pretending to be listening to the defense arguments, and then she reads out what she had written before she heard the argument in the first place. Personally, I don't believe that she herself is responsible for those judgments. It may well be her own handwriting. She may have written them down, but I'm fairly confident that from close observation of a week in the court, whenever there were questions being raised, she would fairly quickly move to an adjournment, then she would go away for 10 minutes, and then she would come back and answer the question. It doesn't have to indicate she's being told what the answer is, but my experience was, my impression was, that is the most likely explanation of what goes on in that court, that she is purely a cipher giving out judgments handed to her by the Home Office. And one of the fascinating things is that again and again and again, she has given judgments against the defense when the prosecution, when the representative of the US government didn't even object to what his lawyer was asking for. The United States government did not object to Julian Assange being seated with his lawyers out of the glass cage. His lawyers made a compelling case that the European Court of Human Rights had ruled that people should not be kept in glass cages during their trial, and also that he is physically and psychologically vulnerable, and that it is normal practice in UK courts for physically and psychologically vulnerable prisoners to be released during the course of their trial and be able to sit next to their lawyers, none of which was rebutted. The United States government stated it had no objection, and still she insisted for no reason at all that I could understand that he be kept in the glass cage. And we saw similar things. The United States government did not object to the postponement of the next stage of the hearing because his lawyers can't have access to him. The United States government were content to go along with postponing the next stage of the hearing to give his lawyers access to enable him to recover his health and to enable witnesses to be brought who wouldn't be able to get here because of coronavirus. And yet, even despite the fact that the defense asked for postponement and the prosecution did not object, still the rates said, no, you can't have it. And there are 5 or 6 of these judgments where the rates refused to go along. Maybe the most striking one was where she claimed that she did not have the ability to stop him being constantly strip searched in the jail. She claimed that she did not have the ability to stop him having his court papers removed from him in prison, so he couldn't prepare for his court case the next day. And again, the prosecution said, yes, you do. The defense said she had the ability to ameliorate his prison conditions. The prosecution actually joined in with the defense, saying that is perfectly normal. You can do that. And again, she refused to do it. Initially, on a false claim, she didn't have the power to do that, for which she was very roundly condemned by the International Bar Association. So this isn't to do with what's happening in court. It's not to do with what the prosecution and defense are saying. This is all coming from her, and I think it's all coming on instructions from outside. So what we're seeing is horrifying. I cannot believe that I'm seeing somebody who I regard as a friend being crushed by the state. And that what is happening is extremely obvious to any observer, but it is being cheered on by the media. And I think this is an extremely sorry reflection of the kind of society we are becoming. I think this is seriously worrying. I have one final thing I want to add, which is really a point of information. As Chris Williamson outlined, the government is seeking, and the UK and United States governments in collusion are seeking to export Julian, despite the fact that there is a bar on political extradition in the extradition treaty under which is being extradited. The US and British governments have argued that the 2003 Extradition Act does not have a bar on political extradition. Therefore, the bar on Political Extradition Act in the 2007 treaty cannot be valid, which is very strange because it's only the 2007 extradition treaty that allows the extradition to happen at all. You can't say you're making an extradition under the treaty but ignoring clause 4 of it. That's a very, very strange argument indeed. But that nonetheless is their argument, and it's an argument which Bereza has shown every sign of favouring. I pointed out to people that I know from my time in the Foreign Office that there must have been a process. When the 2007 extradition treaty was ratified by the UK with the United States, there had to be a process. It's a process I participated in inside the Foreign Office, where it was checked before ratification that the treaty is fully enforceable in UK law, including clause 4. That must have been done. And if clause 4 was not capable of being enforced in UK law, it could not have been ratified or would have had to have been flagged up for subsequent secondary legislation in order to ratify it. And so I've no doubt at all, in fact, it having been ratified, that the UK government is lying and that the UK government's own legal advice at the time would have been that clause 4 can be enforced. I asked people on my blog to put in freedom of information requests for Foreign Office information on the consideration in the Foreign Office of the legal ability to enforce Clause 4 of the extradition treaty. People have now started to get an answer, because that was a few weeks ago. And surprise, surprise, the answer from the Foreign Office is that yes, the Foreign Office does hold information on the ability to apply Clause 4 in UK law, but they cannot release that information because it would be too much work. It would be more than 3.5 days of work, and therefore it would be too costly. That is fascinating, because it's a key point that the case revolves around. And just simply to say, and personally, I don't believe them. I mean, I know the Foreign Office system. Even when I left the Foreign Office in 2005, all such documentation was electronic, and it would actually take you 2 hours, maximum 3.5 hours, not 3.5 days, to search it all out electronically and present it. And they're lying in saying it would be too much work to present that information, but they're not prepared to do it. I'll be doing something on my blog. What I'm looking to do now is see whether we can break it down into a series of information requests, perhaps month by month, so they can't claim, because we were looking at a long period between 2003 to 2007. If we ask for documentation, different people ask for the documentation month by month. Maybe we can get at it that way. But the government does have information on the key point, and they are continuing to hide it. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich. Welcome to another update on the Julian Assange case. Assange's lawyers renewed an application to adjourn the second part of Assange's substantive extradition hearing, originally scheduled for May 18th. The application was argued on the morning of April 27th during what was scheduled to be an administrative hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court in front of Judge Vanessa Bareitzer. The clerk, a few journalists, and a few members of the public, including Julian Assange's father, John Shipton, were physically present in the courtroom. Assange received medical advice that it would not be wise for him to be taken to the video room to attend via video link. Assange therefore could not participate in Monday's court hearing. The prosecution and the defense attended via audio link. The defense argued for the substantive extradition hearing to be postponed due to COVID-19 restrictions preventing them access to their client. The defense also cited Assange's inability to participate in his own defense during the pandemic. This time, the Crown supported the defense's application when they previously remained neutral on the matter. After considering the defense's argument and considering the current situation in the UK, Judge Vanessa Bareitzer decided that it would not be appropriate to hold the substantive extradition hearings on May 18th as originally planned. Because the UK's COVID-19 lockdown is extended until May 7th, Judge Bareitzer said Assange and the attorneys would not be able to be physically present in the courtroom should the hearings resume on May 18th. It was this fact that was decisive in her decision to postpone the hearings. She advised both the defense and the Crown to consider resuming the hearings in July or in November. In an exclusive interview with Sputnik journalist Mohammed El-Mazi, John Shipton, father of Julian Assange, said that the judge's decision was wise. Shipton also noted that he has not seen his son for nearly 6 weeks due to the COVID-19 lockdown. Journalist, author, and historian John Rees shared a similar sentiment and was very pleased with the judge's decision. Although Rees was not physically present in the courtroom, he did listen in via audio link, which was available to journalists and the press. In an interview with El-Mazi, Rees stated that the quality in the audio link was so poor that he could barely understand or hear what was being said in court. Rees also noted that the facility being used was so antiquated that each time a journalist called in or left the call, there was an automated message. And when this automated message wasn't disrupting what was being said in court, the lawyers were still inaudible. Rees, who is also a member of the Don't Extradite Assange campaign, told El-Mazi that typically the organization would be hosting public gatherings and protests. But during the COVID-19 crisis, the DEA campaign and other organizations have had to transition to online campaigning. Just this weekend, the DEA campaign hosted yet another online gathering with special guests, each of whom are whistleblowers, John Kiriakou, Catherine Gunn, and Daniel Ellsberg. ex-CIA torture whistleblower John Kiriakou, who was tried and convicted in the Eastern District Court of Virginia, spoke about the inherent unfairness in this court when reflecting back on his own case. This is the same court that would hear Assange's case if he is extradited to the United States.
I hired O.J. Simpson's jury consultant in my case. He has never lost a case. He represented O.J. Simpson and William Kennedy Smith and George Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin case. He's a winner. And we got him a security clearance. He came to Washington and he reviewed all the documents. And at the end of it, he said to me, if we were in any other district in America besides the Eastern District of Virginia, I would say, let's go for it. We're going to win. But the Eastern District of Virginia, he said, your jury would be made up of people from the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and intelligence community contractors or their family members. He said, you don't stand a chance in the Eastern District of Virginia. That's why they charged you there. I fear the same thing for Julian, that they charged him in the Eastern District of Virginia because it's called the espionage court, because no national security defendant has ever won a case there. And that's why I think that our best shot for Julian in the Eastern District is through publicity and the possibility of jury nullification. We have to get the word out that the man is a journalist, and you can't prosecute journalists for telling the truth. It really is an issue as simple as that.
Kiriakou reiterated the importance of fighting extradition in the UK and the importance of rallying support for Assange in the US and bringing constant attention and awareness to this case and his status as a journalist. At the end of the event, those interested were encouraged to follow the DEA campaign on Twitter at DEA Campaign and visit the website don'textraditeassange.com. The court has adjourned until Monday, May 4th, where a fixed date for the second part of the extradition hearings is expected. I will continue to follow this case and report on this case, so do make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and thank you all for tuning in.
The capable, generous men do not create victims, they nurture victims.
Life means choice. This is not a time for compromise. Julian Assange, Bradley Manning, and Edward Snowden made a choice and paid for it. Art is also called upon to make a choice and show a direction. To do this, I imagined a work of art that does more than pay homage to individuals. 3 men standing on 3 chairs, with an empty 4th chair next to them. A monument to courage, to free speech, and the free flow of information. The 4th empty chair is for each of us to stand up and view our world from a new perspective. Take a stand. Your liberty is at stake. Be courageous, because courage is contagious.